Welcome to the Design Imposter podcast, the show where we explore the enigmatic world of imposter syndrome through the lens of design, community, and empowerment. I'm Monique Jenkins.
And I'm Jessica Valis. We're your co-hosts of the show and the founders of the Creative Circle Collective, a design agency that strengthens community links for nonprofits and corporate businesses by creating impactful branding and websites. Join us as we explore the relationship between design, community, and creativity. Welcome to Design Imposter.
Welcome back to another episode of the Design Imposter podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a crucial topic for getting new clients in your business, and that is mastering the art of RFPs. People generally ask me how we get clients, and more than that, how we create an RFP for a potential client. And in this episode, we're going to walk you through our process and give you some tips and tricks.
That's right. Of course, clients don't always just fall into your lap or come to you via referrals. Sometimes you actually have to seek them out yourself through RFPs and submitting proposals.
Yep. So if you don't know, an RFP is a request for proposal. It is a pivotal part of securing business and expanding your portfolio. Whether you're a freelancer or a part-time business owner or agency owner, or you have a large agency, understanding how to craft and submit winning proposals can significantly impact your success. Or you might find that you absolutely hate it and you never want to do it again, but it is a necessary evil. A request for proposal is a document an organization creates in order to provide details about a project they need to be completed. It invites you, who is the vendor or service provider, to submit a proposal outlining how you would complete a project. This includes materials, timelines, costs, methodologies, and this is in order for them to get a fuller understanding of how your agency specifically would tackle a project.
Yeah, sometimes these RFPs have very strict rules as well. So it might say you can only submit a printed bound copy, which no, thank you. Other times they'll say you can only be a resident of this state or within this county. So you always want to make sure that you actually qualify. Some will be a bit longer, like 100 pages, and others will be like 5, maybe even 2. I think we've actually submitted a proposal before for an RFP that was just 1 page. But you will notice probably the longer the RFP, the more detail oriented they are, the more information they want. So you just have to be prepared to do the work.
Yeah. I always tell people before you start writing your proposal, preparation is key. These things do not happen seamlessly unless you prepare yourself. It's essential that you read through your RFP document to understand what the client's needs, objectives, and what their evaluation criteria is. And if I'm being honest, RFPs are not fun. They can be 50 pages, they can be 2 pages. They require a lot of time commitments for your agency, and they can be very daunting depending on your business. They also take a lot of time. So if you don't have a process in place, it can get away from you very quickly.
So let's talk about the strategy for building the proposal to the RFP. There's different ways that you can build this out. I used to build it out in InDesign, but my computer is so old that InDesign no longer opens. So Monique and I use Google Slides. We also use Google Docs and Google Sheets, but you can also use Microsoft, whichever program works best for you. The only downside to using Google Slides or PowerPoint is that sometimes these RFPs are going to want printed copies. And in that case, I almost feel like it's a waste of space when you could be providing so much more information on a 1 page. So I think in that instance that a Word doc or an InDesign document would work best. But one of the benefits of doing this in Google Slides is that Monique and I are able to both go in at the same time, and we dedicate time at the same time. And we're both working on it simultaneously, and we're leaving comments and we're texting each other. And it's just like the synergy of making the most perfect RFP proposal. I absolutely love that process. And plus, with the proposal being in a slide document, I think you're able to lay out pictures and case studies, graphics a whole lot better than you could if it was just like a Word document or something. One last thing on the Google Slides portion of this is that we were able to make slides interactive. So if you have a ton of information and your client doesn't want to go through like 25 slides. Maybe they only have room for 10. You can add additional slides, hide them, but link to them through different links. So if you're saying, oh, we do UX design, but you don't have the space to define all the elements, you just create other slides, you hide them, and then you add a nice little back button. Or we even did a toggle, which is pretty much just like a back button. So people can navigate between pricing strategies.
Yeah, I think that's a nice little cheat code to give yourself just a little bit more latitude, because crafting proposals can be a beast. A company will want you to scale down what you've built out as a full RFP deck in 150, 70 slides down to 10. And it really just depends on the level of detail that they're looking for. I think that a nice happy medium that we have is that they have the ability to engage with the information that interests them the most. But I think creating a proposal involves a couple of things. You need to be clear, concise, and you need to ensure that your proposal stands out from the competition.
Agreed. And a way that you can also fast track your proposals is if you have them pretty much templated. Like the more you do your proposals, the quicker the process will become. So even looking back at Monique and my first proposal via RFP, I mean, I would cringe to think of where we were and how far we've come, to the point that we've had clients say, oh, well, you kind of answered all of our questions, which is awesome, I guess. You know, there's no room for guessing. We laid it out on the table for you. Having something templated means that you can just copy and paste it time and time again. We've got the templated budget that details, you know, everything from the UX and bullets that, to the development, bullets all that. And we just duplicate that and just change the numbers and link it to the correct form every single time. So if the less you can reinvent, the faster the process will become.
At the end of the day, companies are looking at 60 to 200 proposals that largely say the same things. It is your design and your style of proposal that will help you stand out from the crowd. And it's the first time that they truly get to see what your design aesthetic is. It gives them a little glance into your company, why you started, who you are, and why they'd want to work with you. It also allows them to see your level or attention to detail. Sometimes, you know, as companies, we say we have a high level attention to detail. But then if your proposal has 50 spelling mistakes in it, companies will know that that's not accurate. And that might be something that they really need if the work that they're looking for is for data entry or something like that. So I think it's important for you to understand what the process looks like for your company to go through an RFP, and then, you know, be realistic about what the expectations are going to be for that company.
Yeah, let's jump into putting this proposal together based on the RFP. There are some that do not have a page limit, and then there's other proposals that have a 10-page limit. So for the sake of this, we are going to dive into a 10-page limit. And if you have an RFP that you're trying to tackle and it doesn't have a page limit, you can always elaborate on these steps. And we'll kind of go into each of these slides out of 10 and tell you how we elaborate. So the first one of 10 is the cover page, which I feel like everything needs a cover page. You want to make sure that you've got the correct company name. Sometimes there are companies that are, the project is specific to like a subset. So you want to make sure that you read the RFP and you're putting the correct name in, you're changing the date, you've got your contact information, it's branded, and it really just sets the theme for the proposal.
Yeah. I also think that you need to include, I think you said date, but also like how long the proposal is good for.
Oh yeah.
So maybe if you only have, you know, proposal good for 30 days, but in the contract it says it's going to take them at least 90 days to actually get you results, that might be something that they think automatically disqualifies you. So you want to go ahead and pay attention to those details and update your proposal accordingly.
Another detail you can include as well is if you are a small business, woman-owned business, if you've got any certifications, you can put them on there kind of craftfully and just let them know right off the bat and not hide it in any kind of text. So the second slide you're going to need is your overview slide. Monique, what you got?
So for your overview slide, Think about this as valuable real estate that's important. It's important for the organization that you're pitching to get to know you and potentially your co-founder, and to give them a little bit of context into your background so that they feel comfortable with trusting you with the project that you're going to be taking on. Our overview slide is a picture of me and Jessica, because I think that, we're amazing. But also, it gives them a little bit of a look into our organization. It tells them a little bit about our relative backgrounds in different ways, and a little bit about why we started our agency.
Yeah. So from that slide, which is number 2, goes to the third page, which is team page. If you have more area to elaborate on your proposal, we go from an overview slide to the founders slides, where Monique and I have our own bios. And then we're able to really dive into our specialties and kind of get to the core values that we have. So I think on our founders pages, we also have like our whys, like why did we get into the business, which I think is really important.
Yeah. And then after we do the overview slide, we have the team page. So I think it's important for them to understand who's a part of your team, specifically if diversity is important for the client that you're going to be pitching. And even if it's not, I think it's good to show what your organization looks like more holistically, so that they can get an idea of who these people are and what their relative roles are. So the only thing that I think we have on our team page is images of the team, their names, and then whatever their position title is.
I think it's also important to have a team page, because if you're applying for something and it's rather large, like $100,000, $200,000, the company you're applying for might be skeptical that it's just going to be you taking on this project. Are you finding people to white label under you on the fly, or do you already have an established team? So I really like that we have an established team. It took a minute to create one, but now we're able to include them religiously on every single project.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then the next slide is going to be your project timeline, which is just like so important for you to really spend time and effort devoted to building out the project timeline. It is the basis for what's going to happen, when, how, where, and how that all transitions throughout the project. And sometimes projects are just a couple months. Sometimes they're a couple years. And it's important for your client to understand and know how you intend to tackle every single subset of how a project is going to happen, and then what the deliverables are for each of those pieces of work. I think in our proposal, we have it laid out in 3 phases. I can't remember them off the top of my head.
Phase 1, research. Phase 2, development. Phase 3, implementation.
Exactly. And then underneath all of those, we have a list of deliverables that the client will receive as a result of that phase of the project, which I think is important. Sometimes you talk about a phase and it all seems fine and good, but when you're getting in the nitty gritty, I think that clients need to understand what they're going to take away as a physical possession from that phase of the project. Yes, on your side of the house, if you're a design agency, for instance, it's going to translate, your research is going to translate into the design, but it's good for the client to be able to understand how that happens as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about clients who are like, well, we're putting this RFP together. We know we need UX. And then you're like, oh, the UX phase is going to take 2 months. And you're like, but what happens? What's going on within those 2 months? So when you can have your list of deliverables and be like, we're doing strategy session, we're doing stakeholder interviews, we're doing this and this, it gives the client more confidence to see like we have a process in place.
And it's even, I think the phase process is really similar to the UX process. First process of any project is discovery. We're trying to figure out, what the stakeholders think, what the requirements are. Can we do user interviews, field studies? Do we have surveys that we can send out? Are there competitive testing that we need to do? How do we need to talk to experts? How do we follow, whatever ethical guidelines that a company potentially has? I think that's incredibly important. So all of those little things will help you win, and I say win, arguments later with clients. If a client says to you, I don't like that we put the hero image here, and I don't like this picture, and you can say back to them, so if we did user testing with 100 people and 90% of those people liked the hero image, then we can go back to the client and say, hey, we found that this image really resonates with the audience that you're trying to get to do whatever the action is. We're happy to go in a different direction. However, this would be not in alignment with what we've heard from people who we actually want to purchase services or do whatever we need to do. That way, you're taking the ownership and blame away from you and your process and putting it back on the client. So later when they say, oh, the page isn't converting and we don't like the imagery, you can say, okay, well, this is the imagery that we wanted to use, and this is the one that tested better. Would we like to revert back to that? So I think all of these little phases and steps and the deliverables as a result of them help you to be able to create a stronger argument if you need to down the line.
Another part of this timeline is that it creates accountability between you and the client. So obviously they haven't signed anything yet, but if you were to say, phase 1 will be over in August, phase 2 will be over in November, phase 3 will be over in January. Like, you have a timeline that you have to stick to as an agency because you're going to have other clients as well. And when you're thinking about, when's the start date? Push it a month out from when they want that RFP due, because realistically they're going to need to go through a lot of RFP proposals. So they're going to need to look through all of them, do interviews, do more interviews, maybe sign contracts. Now you got to wait for the check. Then there's the onboarding. So you might not get started for at least a month. So have that in your mind when you're submitting it. If the deadline to submit something is July 1st, have it go project start date at August 1st. Yeah. Just be realistic with yourself.
And they also give you an idea of that. Sometimes they'll have that context inside of your RFP. It will say, this is the last day we're taking submissions, and then this is when we expect to make a decision by. Does that always happen in the way that they think? Absolutely not. Projects wildly derail themselves in a bunch of different ways, but it does give you an idea of what their thinking is or what their process is. And if they don't make a selection on August 1st, for instance, and that selection doesn't come until September 1st, then you know that you'll have to push back the project timeline, and both people will be able to understand why.
Yeah. And I think the project timeline, just briefly, I'm going to touch on budget, because with the timeline, you're saying it's going to take X amount of time for UX, X amount of time for development, and knowing how much time they're going to be spending on a certain part of the project will dictate the allocated expenses that go towards that part.
The next slide that we have is a services overview. It's essentially all of the relative phases of the project, kind of when they're going to happen. And we allow our clients to explore or to dig deeper into detailed information around a relative subject. So let's say we have 6 separate services that we're going to be supplying to a client. We don't go into detail for every single one of those services because we only have the 10 slides, but we do hide slides, and we tell them in discovery and research, this is how this project or this process starts, and this is when we'll do data collection, stakeholder interviews, market analysis, things like that. And for every single one of those subsets, we'll go ahead and tell them what our expectation of that service is, and then we can have a conversation on whether that's a service that they think they need, or if that's something that we need to remove potentially.
Yeah, the services page also expands on what you said in the project timeline with your deliverables. People might not understand what you mean by stakeholder interviews. So we give ourselves a little bit of space to have, stakeholder interviews, and then 1 or 2 sentences that go with it to just explain what we're going to do during this phase. In larger proposals, like Monique said, we will make them clickable so you can toggle back and forth and really learn more about each one. But sometimes when you're limited to slides, we use this to just explain more what some of these steps are. And we don't always include all of them. We'll pick and choose which one are the most important.
Yeah. And next, we talk about budget. Budget is the slide that you really need to hone in on and get down quickly. We do our budget and allocation of hours at our hourly rate for a total for the client, and we give them 2 options. One, we break it down by phase. So on this overview slide, we'll say phase 1 is research. Research is 85 hours at this rate, let's say $100. That means that research is going to be $8,500. Phase 2 is development. That's going to take 200 hours at $100 an hour. That's going to be $20,000. So that's how we break it down for our client. Then we create a link to a Excel file that they can move over to for a more detailed breakdown. So research is phase one. These are all the steps of research that are going to be completed and how much time we're going to allocate to each one of those steps.
Each one of those little steps are also the deliverables that are mentioned in the timeline. Sometimes we'll merge them together if they kind of go hand in hand, but we also show like, oh, we're going to be focusing on stakeholder interviews for like a week, 20 hours, 10 hours. It really just depends on the client's budget.
Yeah. And then the last thing that we do that isn't typical of all other agencies is that we have a contingency budget. Projects notoriously go over costs. It just happens. You spend more time on research or more time on development than you actually allocated in the beginning, and you need to cover those costs. You're not doing that work for free, and you need to be able to cover or allocate that cost out. So we do a contingency budget of 10% of the total project cost. So if the project cost is $70,000, then the contingency budget would be $6,000, and we'll go ahead and pass that cost over to the client, and we tell them, this budget is contingent on yada, yada, yada. We might need to allocate more hours in specific settings or different things. Maybe there's software that we need to purchase that we didn't know of initially in our proposal. And that just gives them a little bit of cushion so that we don't have to go back to them later and ask for more money, which is always a really difficult conversation to have.
Yeah. And I found that our transparency with us detailing everything in the budget and then saying upfront, like, this is the contingency plan. It's for if, the unknown expenses or whatnot. I think that's really honest. Just be like, hey, we budgeted this. You said you had $50,000 to spend. Here's $50,000, but wait, there's more. Here's the 10% or however much percent contingency plan. And we just signed a client and we went over their budget.
Yeah.
So don't hate the contingency. So the next one is responsibilities. Not everybody includes this. And this slide for us came about because we had one RFP that said, tell us what we're responsible for. And I was like, you know what? That's a good idea. What are you responsible for? Just because you sign us doesn't mean we're doing the entire project. So that could mean you need to gather all of the content that's needed. You need to find pictures and images, and you need to organize the meetings that come up, or like the training sessions. Like if it says, most of them say like, we want a training session after the conclusion of the project, that needs to be organized by you. Like I can't be responsible for going back and forth with 20 people on your team. Like you will be responsible for doing that. I'll meet up with you. And it alleviates a lot of headache, but also like, these are things that like the head of the project on the client side should be able to handle.
Yeah. And if the client doesn't understand what their responsibilities are, they're always are going to be delays. If they don't know that they have to be timely with the content updates, with the imagery selection, with all of these relative things, then they kind of get out of hand. Sometimes clients don't have the same deadline as you, even though you guys are all working towards the same goal. And they think that they have 3 weeks to get you back edits on content. And that's just not a reasonable time frame in a project that only lasts a month or a couple of months. And those type of delays add up in cost, but they also push the project timeline back. And because the client usually wants the project still in the time frame that they initially proposed, you have to be really good about understanding what their responsibilities are and reminding them of those responsibilities as you go through.
Yeah, and I don't think of this slide as a negative. I really think of it more as like a collaboration. And I think that's actually how we have the slide titled. It's like, here's how we collaborate. And then the first thing is like responsibilities. You'll be responsible for ABC. So it really is a collaboration if you really want to make them feel involved, which they will be, obviously. But like Monique said, it really just helps to keep the project on task.
Yeah. And then on the next 2 slides, we're going to have case studies. In a deck that's only 10 slides, you're not going to have much room for a case study. So let's say worst case scenario, you're doing a PowerPoint deck or a PowerPoint slide deck. So for the next slide, we're going to have case studies. Case studies are a wildly important part of making sure that a client understands what your previous work is and what you can do for them in your project. And if you only have 10 slides, I think spending a couple slides on case studies is so important. And on your case study slide, you want to have an overview of the project and your impact. You don't have a lot of real estate to kind of give people the fluff and potentially talk about all of the UX and development and all of these other things. So you want to get really specific on the points. What exactly the project was, what you did in the project, what that impact was as a result. And if you want to add a pretty picture, I think that visuals really help to grab people and to draw them in. But by and large, this content is going to be full of words, and you want to design it in a way that is nice. I do not suggest adding a bunch of visualization on the impact side. So a client doesn't necessarily want or need to see a graph of how that works or any of that other jazz. Those things are really hard for them to understand and comprehend. I think you can just highlight in big, bold letters exactly what percentage increase in that specific website you were able to drive in whatever time period you were able to do so.
And with case studies, this is really your time to wow. Think of the industry that this RFP is coming from. If it's education, go put your schools in there. If it's from something that's environmental, grab your environmental clients. And if it's from nonprofits or corporate entities, find the most appropriate case study for that industry. Let them know that you've worked in this industry before. These were the results, like Monique said. And what I said earlier about having templates is that you just have this master list with all of your case studies, and you can just grab the ones you need. So again, you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel with this. And as you grow your agency, make sure you are updating your case studies to show your most recent work, and don't forget to add those statistics.
Yeah. And then your next slide is going to be referrals. Clients love nothing more than reaching out to previous clients to see what their experience with working with you was like. So make sure they have the ability to contact your referrals, or I see sometimes that people will put something like, if you need referrals, just reach out to me. We like to go ahead and put our referrals directly inside of our proposal so that they can reach out at their own latitude.
I think if you were going to do the, for referrals, please click here. That's a good place to, you can have that on your end slide, I think, in your conclusion. But with your referrals, make sure that whoever you put as your referral knows and approves of it. Because the last thing you want is to get a blind call. And I've had this happen with former interns where they're applying for a job, and all of a sudden it's ring, ring. Hi, how was Judy Blue at this role? And I'm like, hold on, let me think for a second. So at least let them know in ahead that, you have them and that they might be getting contacted. So far, we haven't had anybody actually reach out to our referrals, which is fine with me. Less work for my current clients. And then on the end slide, this is where you wrap it all up. Pretty bow. Thank you so much. Monique and I have a QR code on ours that will link to all of our LinkedIns, our email addresses, the podcast website, the company website, and everything else in between. We're also seeing more RFPs ask for terms and conditions. So we just include a little link to that as well.
Yep. And with that, that's the end of your 10 slide decks. We'll go ahead and put an example of what one of our slide decks looks like, and you guys can use that as a starter template in order to build your own.
All right, so we briefly touched on the budget slide, but this part takes a lot of work. It's the most exciting. You get the most energized when you see that number. Oh, they have, a $10,000 budget. I'm going to put all this together. Be realistic with that budget. They can't ask for SEO, UX, content writing, and all these other things with such a small budget for you to do it well. So when you're putting your proposal together, be realistic. If, it's $10,000 and they ask for SEO, let them know this is only going to cover meta tags and descriptions and, clean HTML and CSS. It does not go beyond that, because that's going to be outside of the scope of the monetary cost. So as much as you want to elaborate and go all out with this client, you have to be realistic to yourself so that you can actually make money.
Yeah, pricing can be a bitch. As a person making it, sometimes you know the price, sometimes you don't know the price. What people are asking for is wildly out of line in comparison to what they are paying you. And it's important to strike an even balance between being competitive and ensuring that your business remains profitable. Because it doesn't matter if you sign a contract that is $100,000 if you have to spend $90,000 to make it.
Monique and I like to break down the project budgets in a couple ways. First of all, we want to figure out how much time is it going to go towards the different phases like we talked about. But also, after all that is said and done, we have to allocate the money to certain accounts, because out of 10,000, not all 10,000 is going to the bank of Jessica Valis. Mm-hmm. So the way we have it broken down is that we immediately allocate 30% to taxes off the bat. So if it's 10% or $10,000 and it's 30%, we're down to 7,000 now. So for you to say like, oh, I'm going to give them the bells and whistles. No, because you're not making money right now. The next thing we have is for the contractors, which we allocate about 15% for. It's always nice if you go a little below, but sometimes you are going to have to go higher. And that's, again, just going to affect your bottom line and how much money goes into your pocket. The next one is operating expenses. This is going to be all your subscriptions, your overhead, anything that you spend money on for your business. And we like to allocate 10%. And then there's the emergency fund, because not every month is going to be a great month. And things come up and it's going to be wildly outside any expected budget. So we send 5% to that as well, which leaves us with what we make.
40%.
Divide that by 2 co-owners.
Mm-hmm.
So 20% work for you, Monique?
Not all the time, but I take it.
And we're in the process of creating spreadsheets all the time that help us allocate the money better. And, if we're going to say, oh, the contractors are going to work 50 hours on this, and then when we plug it in, it says that the 50 hours is going to go like into the 20-25% range when we've allocated 15%, then we know we have to go back and reevaluate how we're allocating this money. So don't think that just because you get a $50,000 project that, we're going to be Scrooge McDuck in it. Oh, and of course, let's not forget those wonderful clients who conveniently forget to include the budget in the proposal. Nothing irks me more than having to guess. We have been in a situation before where somebody was like, hey, I need this thing done in like 3 days over Easter weekend. And can you write up a proposal? Okay, well, give us the details for it. It's a car company. They export like vintage cars, exotic cars. They're going to a car show. And we're like, what's the budget? Oh, I don't really know, which we should have pushed for. Mm-hmm. Because we did the research. We're like, okay, what big car shows are this week? Oh, it's the biggest one in the country. Okay. So we priced based on what we thought somebody who had a large car dealership would be able to afford over the course of 3 days on a holiday weekend. And I think we quoted at like $120,000. Mm-hmm. And I got the call and they're like, is that $120 an hour, or is that $120,000 total? I was like, yeah, it's the latter. And they're like, oh, that's way outside what we would have wanted. I was like, well, you didn't give me enough details. Like, you made it seem like your client is so high end that we're trying to give you high end. So always push to see if you can get that number. Monique, you have a strategy for getting that out of people.
I always counter with clients. So if a client comes to us and they say, hey, we have a luxury car company and we need a logo design for this upcoming weekend, I will ask them, okay, what type of budget are you working with? And if they say, no, I'm not really sure, I would say, okay, are you willing to pay $1 million for this logo? And they say, oh, well, I wasn't thinking it was going to be that high. I was thinking closer to 50. Okay, then 50 is the number. So I think that you have to push back with them. Is it going to happen in that first interaction? No. If I say $1 million, you usually can see it on the client's face. They'll be looking like, I can't believe she just said $1 million. And it doesn't have to be as high as $1 million. It could be 100,000. It could be whatever. But once they have that first reaction, then you know either you're too high or you're too low. If in the moment that you say 100,000, they say, yep, we'll go ahead and take that. Yeah. Can we sign the contract now? It means that you price yourself too low. If you say 100,000 and they get the look of disgust on their face, or they say, well, I surely wasn't thinking it was going to be that high, then I'll say again, well, what were you thinking? Because this is in line with the pricing for this type of project in this timeline. But I'm willing to work with you because I really, really like you. And I want to see your project succeed. So if you can give me a better idea of what you're looking for, I can give you an idea of we can make that work. And if they say 50,000, you know that it really only costs you 20,000 to do the work. You go ahead and you profit on that $30,000.
Another thing with, we don't know what the budget is. A lot of companies need to get approval before they just decide they're going to get a new website. Where do they find out the numbers and get approval for that new website? From the board. The board will say, yep, we can get a new website. Your budget is within $50,000 to $100,000. That's great. So when these large organizations are like, we don't really know. You do know. Your board approved it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the number didn't trickle down to you. But like once you sign on, it once again has to go to the board to get approval to make sure that you stayed within that budget range. So they do have that budget.
Yeah. But all in all, I think where people potentially go wrong in RFPs is pricing themselves outside of what they are actually comfortable with. So you don't want to price yourself so low that you can't do the work very well. And in my experience, clients who don't pay you well end up being a nightmare. So your $10,000 client is going to need a lot more handholding than your $100,000 client. They are secure in the fact that they have no idea what they're doing as far as design is concerned, and they want you to be the expert. And that's really the clientele that you're looking for.
I want to talk about how we find these RFPs.
So we find RFPs a couple of different ways. First way is RFP City. It is a free site where you're able to access RFPs of companies who are looking for services to be rendered. We also utilize RFP Market, which is a paid service. You pay about $6 per RFP, and you select the ones that you believe that you qualify for. You pay the money, and then you go ahead and read over the proposal. The only thing in that scenario is that sometimes you don't qualify for those for whatever reason. Maybe the proposal says something like, we want someone who has worked in the New York City school district, or we want someone with a different type of criteria that you don't have. And then you paid your $6 for no reason. But it's really a gamble in that regard. The other two ways that I usually find RFPs are through government websites. So SAM.gov or USA.gov both have RFPs that are specific to government entities that you can apply for.
And the last thing that I use is I go on LinkedIn and I go to the search, I type in, or I click for posts, and I type in RFP website or proposal for website redesign, or branding, or whatever we're interested in, whatever kind of clients we're trying to acquire, because sometimes people will share that their company has an active RFP on their LinkedIn, but you're not necessarily going to find it elsewhere. So I usually make sure that you're like looking within the past 24 hours, week, or month, because after that, like the proposals are well beyond due. And the most exciting, like when you first type it in, you're like, oh my God, this looks so great. And then you're like, oh wait, this is from 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So sort by date, it's really important. Yeah. But then sometimes they also provide more details on that post. Like there was one RFP where it didn't say who to contact, but the LinkedIn post said who to contact. So yeah, it doesn't hurt to look it up. All right, you've got your proposal all put together and it's time to submit. You need to read the RFP again very carefully to make sure that you're submitting it the correct way. Sometimes they want you to send it to a particular mailbox. It needs to be addressed to one person. The email headline or title needs to be labeled a certain way. The attachments need to be a certain way. Sometimes they want printed copies. Again, read it at the beginning before you get started on all this, because if they want a printed copy sent to their address, you're like, at least for me, I'm like, no, thank you. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you read through and get all those specifications right before you send them out.
Now, this is kind of tricky. Some of the points of contact don't want you to follow up with them. They gave very clear instructions in the RFP, and they will penalize you for reaching out. Others might use your reaching out as an opportunity to take a second look at your proposal or think that you're super interested. So it's really up to them, but just be careful when you're reaching out. I know in my experience, they've been very specific about saying do not reach out because they don't want you to form a relationship with someone and for that person to catapult or push you through to the next round without truly vetting your company or organization. Or they just don't want a bunch of spam coming to their inbox from 60 to 100 different people who are looking for an opportunity to gain this contract.
Yeah. And part of, emailing too much is also stalking them on LinkedIn. You can go stalk them. Yep. Just don't ask to connect with them. Not at least until you find that client.
Exactly. And then one last thing is each proposal submission is a learning opportunity. Whether you win or you lose, there is valuable feedback. Sometimes you get individualized feedback from people. Sometimes they don't get back to you with that type of context, specifically if you don't make it to the next round. But if you do make it to an interview, I do expect for them to give you some type of feedback that would allow you to refine your proposal deck just a little bit more.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to send your proposal off to somebody who's maybe not even in the industry and be like, could you read this over and let me know what you think? And have them give it a critical eye. Don't be offended if they have changes. Monique shared our proposal with one of her acquaintances, and they got back and said, like, your brand is so friendly and approachable, but when I read this, I did not get that feel. So we're like, all right, let's go back and rewrite, because ChatGPT is not always getting it right. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to go back and get more information from your friends and family about what you can include.
Cool. And with that being said, we're going to wrap today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Peace.
As we conclude another episode of the Design Imposter podcast, remember, self-doubt may be a universal experience, but it should never define your worth or potential.
Embrace the power of your creativity, trust in your abilities, and continue creating fearlessly. You belong in this space, and your contributions are invaluable to your community and those around you.
Thank you for being a part of the Design Imposter community, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and leave a review to help other imposters find us.
Until our next episode, keep those headphones ready.